Hey everyone, and welcome back to our third week of our series, Back to the Future. Now, if you're watching online, that means that you're not able to join us at Gainsborough Park today. That's absolutely fine. We are so glad that you're watching today and really hope that you're able to engage and enjoy the talk. But today we're going to be continuing our series where we're talking about travelling between the past and the present and how that can help change the future. Humanity hasn't yet figured out how to build a time machine. But if we could, which everyday object would you like to turn into a time machine? The more ridiculous, the better. So why don't you type in the comments, let us know what would you like to turn into a time machine. In one time travel movie from the past, Marty McFly's mind is blown when his scientist friend turns something pretty unlikely into a time machine. If I told you to imagine a time-travelling car, you'd probably picture something like a Telsa. But the Doc built his time machine out of a DeLorean, a car that looked cool but was actually a terrible car. The DeLorean was only manufactured for about 2 years, but there were years of anticipation before its release. People thought this was going to have tons of power and really cool features. When the car was finally available, people jumped at the chance to buy it. A lot of people even paid way more than it was worth to get their hands on it, but it didn't take long for people to realise the DeLorean was not what they expected it to be. And today, the DeLorean is considered to be one of the worst cars of all time. After 2 years, the company that manufactured them filed for bankruptcy. Now, I hate to admit it, but I can relate to the DeLorean. When I was 20 years old, I went for my first ever trip to the mountains to learn to snowboard. Sam and I travelled around Canada going to different mountains, and it was a really great time. But he had spent 6 months a few years earlier being a chalet host in the snow. So he was extremely good at snowboarding, like really, really good. And I, on the other hand, had never done anything like it. And I kind of thought I was going to get it straight away. I'm a sporty person, I'm quite coordinated, and I can skateboard, so surely I'll be fine. But turns out I was terrible. I spent 3 days pretty much falling face first into the snow. My knees were black, and then the second day in the mountains I actually put a towel down my trousers to add padding because I was in so much pain. It was, oh my goodness, it was awful. I was terrible, just constantly falling down the mountain. At one point I even said, right, that's it, I'm walking, and Sam was like, you can't walk down a mountain, Alice, it's so high. Now I'm sure we can all think of times when our reality didn't meet someone's or our own expectations. Sometimes we assume people are one thing, only to be surprised when we find out they're actually not. Now, you've probably figured this out by now, but sometimes we all need the reminder that looks can be deceiving. The DeLorean may have looked cool, well, for the 80s, but it was one of the worst cars ever. And the people that we might consider to be the least impressive are sometimes the ones who surprise us with their talents. And sometimes the people who seem the most impressive aren't always everything that we think they are. There are a lot of reasons outward impressions can be deceiving, but here's one. Most of the time, we're all trying to impress each other. There have been times in high school when I pretended to know a song that I didn't because all of my friends loved it and kept singing it, and I'd just never heard of it. So I pretended to know the song. And I think we all want to be liked. We all want to feel important and be accepted. But when we don't feel liked, important, or accepted, we sometimes act or pretend or show off or brag or sometimes put others down to make ourselves feel better. Now, I want you to respond to the following questions by putting a little emoji in the comments. Do you know anyone who always follows the rules? So do you know someone or anyone who always follows the rules? And then, are you someone who always follows the rules? Are you someone who always follows the rules. There are rules of behaviour in every single culture around the world. Even your school, your group of friends have its own culture, and sometimes these rules are learned only through observation. But other times, these rules are written into laws or official codes of conduct and things like that. And in Jesus' time, there were plenty of rules, both written and unwritten, that shaped the community and culture in which Jesus lived. Think about your school or your group of friends. Have you ever noticed how what's cool or what's acceptable is often determined by the most popular or beautiful people? Well, let me tell you, the same was true in Jesus' day. In their culture, some of the most influential people were the religious leaders. These religious leaders really loved rules, but for all the wrong reasons. These leaders were experts in the law and knew every religious custom inside and out. They had created a culture where following their rules wasn't just cool, it was right. And because they were the best at following their own rules, these leaders believed themselves to be the best and the most right out of anyone. But when Jesus sometimes ignored their rules and customs, these religious leaders didn't like it at all. And they got really upset and annoyed and really, really angry. And we can read about one of these examples in Luke 11, verses 37 to 41. Let me read it to you. As Jesus was speaking, one of the Pharisees invited him home for a meal. So he went in and took his place at the table. His host was amazed to see that he sat down to eat without first performing the hand-washing ceremony required by Jewish custom. Then the Lord said to him, "You Pharisees are so careful to clean the outside of the cup and the dish, but inside you are filthy, full of greed and wickedness. Fools! Didn't God make the inside as well as the outside? So clean the inside by giving gifts to the poor, and you will be clean all over." Imagine this playing out. A religious leader invites Jesus to brunch. Seriously, the word dine in this section of scripture implies morning or noontime meal. And the religious leader assumes Jesus would show up fully washed because that was the religious custom. Not a simple hand wash though. He wants Jesus to take a full immersion ceremonial bath to meet his standard of purity. And when Jesus doesn't comply, he doesn't do this, the religious leader wants to know why Jesus isn't following the very important religious rules, or his very important religious rules. And Jesus completely shocks him by saying that those rules aren't that important to God. Other things, Jesus says, are more important, like committing yourself to love and justice. Jesus isn't afraid to be direct. He's not interested all the time in being polite. He tells the truth. He says it how it is. And Jesus says a cup can look clean on the outside while being filthy on the inside. Like that cool-looking DeLorean that turned out to be one of the worst cars ever made, Jesus says you might do a lot of good things, but your heart can still be full of greed and wickedness. Maybe you're thinking, what an awkward brunch. Jesus was so rude. But sometimes the most loving thing that we can do is to tell someone the truth, especially when they're harming others. I want you to keep that in mind as we continue reading what Jesus had to say. So let me carry on reading from Luke 11, 42 to 46. What sorrow awaits you, Pharisees, for you are careful to tithe even the tiniest income from your herb garden, but you ignore justice and the love of God. You should tithe, yes, but do not neglect the more important things. What sorrow awaits you, Pharisees, for you love to sit in the seats of honour in the synagogues and receive respectful greetings as you walk in the marketplace. Yes, what sorrow awaits you, for you are like hidden graves in a field. People walk over them without knowing the corruption they are stepping on. Teacher, said an expert in religious law, you have insulted us too in what you just said. Yes, Jesus said, what sorrow also awaits you, experts in religious law, for you crush people with unbearable religious demands, and you never lift a finger to ease the burden. Jesus is frustrated and mourning the mistreatment of the people that he loves and created, especially because the people causing them harm are the people who claim to be the spiritual leaders. Jesus warns these leaders that fulfilling the rules won't help them win God's approval if they don't share God's heart of love and justice for others. Worrying about our own rightness doesn't matter if we're not also worrying about the well-being of others and looking out for those in need. And Jesus wasn't just wildly ranting about the Pharisees in this passage. Jesus' words were carefully crafted to make a point from the past. Centuries before Jesus walked on the earth, God sent prophets like Isaiah and Jeremiah and Amos and many more to deliver messages from God to God's people, the Israelites. And often, the prophets were sent in order to tell God's people how they had strayed from God's righteousness and justice, and how they could then make things right again with God. So when Jesus called out the Pharisees' sin and called them back towards God's love and justice, Jesus was pointing back in time to the book of Amos. Amos was a prophet who had a lot to say to God's people, like performing certain rituals or following certain rules doesn't make you righteous in God's eyes. And God doesn't care about all the good you do if you're oppressing people who are poor and in need. And right living isn't just about you. It's about doing justice for the sake of others. So Amos 5 verses 1 to 4 is a really long passage, and Jesus quotes from this passage in many places. We're actually not going to read from the whole thing because it's quite long and we haven't got the time today, but I'm going to pick up on a few verses that Jesus quotes from. So verse 1 says, "Listen, you people of Israel, listen to this funeral song I am singing. You twist justice, making it a bitter pill for the oppressed. You treat the righteous like dirt. What sorrow awaits you who say, if only the day of the Lord were here. You have no idea what you are wishing for. The day will bring darkness, not light. I hate all your show and pretense, the hypocrisy of your religious festivals and solemn assemblies. I will not accept your burnt offerings and grain offerings. I won't even notice all your choice peace offerings. Away with your noisy hymns of praise. I will not listen to the music of your harps. Instead, I want to see a mighty flood of justice, an endless river of righteous living." Did you notice any of the phrases used by both Jesus and Amos? Woe to you. Jesus knew the words of Amos, and he knew that the Pharisees knew them too. That's why he reached into the past and pulled Amos's warning into the present. Jesus and Amos both cared enough for the leaders they were speaking to that they told them the truth. You're doing a lot right, but you've missed the thing that matters most. The Pharisees knew everything there was to know about rules, religious customs, but they had forgotten one of the most important things. They forgot the words of Amos. They forgot that God wasn't impressed by them. After they received God's love for themselves, they forgot to share it with others. They forgot other people mattered. They forgot God's heart for justice. What did Jesus hope they did instead? He hoped they would remember the words of the past, that they would humble themselves, that they would lament the ways they contributed to injustice and commit themselves to the work of justice instead. And Jesus does the same for you and for me. Because Jesus' mission was to set people free and to rebuild what was destroyed. And he invites us to grieve the ways that we have harmed others. Consider how we can commit ourselves to freeing and rebuilding alongside Jesus. Love God and others more than ourselves or our religion. Jesus is grieved when we commit injustice against each other, especially when we disguise our lack of compassion in religiosity. That's not how Jesus calls us to follow him. Jesus calls us to do justice. But now what? What does God want all of us to do about it? What about you? How are you doing justice? How have you contributed to injustice? How are you neglecting the work of justice right now? If you're not sure, that's okay. You're not a religious leader from 2,000 years ago, so maybe you're struggling to understand how Jesus' words and woes apply to you. I'd like us to ask ourselves some really challenging questions. So I'm going to read out these questions. Maybe write down the ones on a piece of paper or on your phone, some of the ones that stand out to you, or you can write them all down. Have I taken something that wasn't mine? Have I taken advantage of someone else? Have I participated in something that hurt someone else? Have I missed a chance to share empathy with someone who is without a dad or a mum? Have I shown kindness to children? Have I cared well for elderly folks? Have I allowed cruel or discriminatory words to live in my mind or conversations? Have I created a safe space for people with disabilities or different abilities than my own? Have I ever fought for someone whose voice has been silenced? Am I willing to be an advocate for the needs of others? I hope you've identified a place in your life where you can learn to be a better doer of justice for others. When you discover an injustice, you can do something and you can say something. Did you know there are 790 million people in the world who still lack access to safe drinking water? What can we do about this kind of injustice? Well, we can do something. For a month, we could all bring in our own pocket money that we've earned at work, or you can ask your parents to pay you to do some jobs around the house. We can twin a toilet or we can twin a tap as a youth group for just £60. Do you know that's only 6 of us bringing in £10, or 12 of us bringing in £5, or 12 of us bringing in £1.25 a month per week for 4 weeks. And I think we can all do that. Don't you? And then the second thing, we can say something. When someone asks, why don't you want to go to Starbucks? Or why won't you buy that ice cream? Or why are you doing all those jobs around the house? You can tell them that you're saving up to twin a tap to provide a community with running water. You know, sometimes it's really difficult to know where to begin on your justice journey. There are so many problems out there, and most of them can feel bigger than you and me. But God didn't tell us to quit caring when we're encountered by big problems. We heard about this when we did the series on goals in January. Jesus and the prophets speak to us from the past, and they invite us to join God in changing the future. And there is so much that can be done when we decide to do justice. So what are you going to do this week? And what are you going to say this week? We're not going to be jumping into a Zoom call this week because we're actually meeting in person. But I really hope that if you're watching, you enjoyed the talk and you feel challenged by it. And we hope to see you very, very soon. Take care, and we'll see you soon.